And now let me introduce Mr. Joseph P. Kennedy.
Good evening. It's a pleasure for Rose and I to be here with you on this evening in 1961 at your library. Now, we don't have any speeches prepared, but rather we have some questions I understand that you have, and they've been submitted to the library, and we like to be organized. So we've asked that you number the questions, and we'll take them in that order. So let's get started. And who has the first question, and who is it for?
I'll ask the first question. Mrs. Kennedy, how did you two meet?
You want to know how we met? Well, our family vacationed each summer in Old Orchard Beach in Maine, as did other Irish Catholic Bostonians, including the Kennedy family. So we met often. I don't remember when we first met, but I'm told we were very young. However, I do remember becoming increasingly attracted to Joe when I was 16. Oh, I fell in love with his 100-watt smile, and I was thrilled when he finally invited me to a dance at his prep school, Boston Latin. But my father said no. My father, John Fitzgerald, was the mayor of Boston at the time, called Honey Fitz for his sweet Irish voice. Well, anyway, I do believe that father said no to Joe because he was not fond of Joe's father, P.J. Kennedy, who supported father's political opponent. But I was flattered that Joe was interested in dating me. And having father refuse, oh, that made it more exciting and romantic. We managed to see each other in secret, well, secret from father. We would meet at friends' homes, and I invited him to my high school dances. In those days, we had dance cards, and Joe would fill out my card with all these fake names, making father thinking I was dancing with different boys. But in fact, I was dancing all night with Joe. So much fun. Joe finally proposed to me. I don't remember his exact proposal, but I do remember the 2-carat diamond engagement ring, and I said yes right away. We were married October 7th, 1914, small, modest wedding with family and close friends. And the honeymoon, oh, that was wonderful, carefree, and very romantic. So thank you for that question. That was number one. Who has number two?
I'm going to ask Mr. Browning, my colleague, to ask you every other question.
Okay.
Thomas?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you do number two and the even numbered questions?
Those questions for Mr. Kennedy. When did you start a family?
Thank you, Thomas. Well, as I recall, we started a family 9 months and 2 years, 9 months and 2 weeks after the wedding. Well, that was in 1915. Our oldest son, Joe Jr., was born. And then 2 years later, our next son, John Fitzgerald, was born. Of course, we called him Jack. And then that was a month after we got into the First World War with Germany. I got a management position with a company building warships. And during that time, our first daughter, Rose Marie, who we call Rosemary, was born. Then the war ended in 1918. I couldn't see much future in a company that built warships, so I got a job with a stock brokerage firm and also did a little real estate. So Thomas, that's how we started our family. So who has question number 3, and who is that for?
Oh, I'll take care of number 3. This is from Mrs. Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy told us about your first 3 children. When were the rest of them born?
Oh, Matt, how nice of you to inquire. Well, let's see. In 1920, our second daughter, Kathleen, was born. Joe and the children called her Kick. 1921, then our daughter Eunice was born. And if any of you out there are counting, yes, that is 9 children, excuse me, 9 children in, no, 6 children in 9 in a few years. So it was 5 children in 6 years. We have total of 9, of course. Let's see, after that, 1924, Patricia was born, and Robert in 1925. 3 years later, daughter Jean was born, and 4 years after her, our last child, son Edward, was born, and we call him Teddy. Now, when Teddy was born, Joe was in Palm Beach. Oh, I guess he felt sorry for me because he arranged to have meals prepared at the Ritz Hotel and delivered to me in the hospital by way of taxi cab. Oh, don't you think that was sweet of him? Now, let's see. I think we've covered all 9 children. I hope I haven't forgotten someone. When they were growing up, I kept index cards on each one of the children with their medical history. Oh, that's things like, illnesses, shots, doctor's appointments. So I was always up to date with their issues regarding health. It's very important to be organized when you have 9 children. Now, most of them were healthy physically, except for Jack. Oh, he seemed to be coming down with something all the time. Oh, I think he had nearly every childhood illness there was. I didn't think he had enough energy for a career, much less a career as President of the United States. So that is all 9 children, and thank you, Matt, for that question. Who has number, I think it's 4 is next?
I'll ask another question, number 4. Mr. Kennedy, I heard that you were in the movie business. Is that true?
Well, Matt, yes, I was in the movie business. That's true. Oh, you'd like a little more detail. Pardon me, but we Kennedys have a sense of humor, and sometimes it's a bit much. Well, I wanted to get into an emerging industry, one that I could get in on the ground floor and make money as it grew. And I heard about this new moving picture industry. So I set up a company to distribute movies on the East Coast, and then I bought a small theater. Well, Matt, I realized that my little theater couldn't afford many of the blockbuster films that Hollywood was producing, so I joined a company that produced films, and we made action films and westerns that our small theaters could afford. Well, I went out to Hollywood to make some contacts, and they said that I was quite welcome there with my big smile, my warm handshake, unlike some of those cold fish movie producers they were used to. Well, I got involved in actually 3 different moving picture companies out there. And then a fellow named David Sarnoff came along. He put together a big company called RKO Pictures. He bought all 3 of the companies I was involved in. So I came away from Hollywood with $2 million in profit. So Matthew, that was a pretty good experience for me in the movie business. Who has the next question, and who is it for?
This one is from Mrs. Kennedy. What about your husband's friendship with the movie star Gloria Swanson? What's that all about?
You want to know about Joe and Gloria Swanson's relationship. Well, first of all, Joe and his business associates helped straighten out her finances. Joe planned to produce a film with her in it. Oh, yes, I have heard the rumors about she and Joe being more than just business partners, but I firmly believe they were only rumors. So I chose to ignore the ugly gossip. Now, Joe did produce a film called Queen Kelly with her starring in it, and it was a disaster. Oh, poorly directed and never completed. Why, he lost nearly $1 million on that project. It was the most discouraging failure of his career. Well, later, he did helped produce her first talking movie in 1929 called The Trespasser. That was a success, big box office hit and very profitable. It made him feel a little bit better about the movie industry, but he decided he would quit while he was ahead. And now, as for Gloria Swanson, oh my, she had her own issues. And do you know she went through, eventually, 6 husbands? Now, I do appreciate, Matt, you asking that question so I could clarify their relationship, but I do hope that puts an end to those types of questions. I do believe that that was number 5, and who has number 6, and who is it for? I believe it might be Thomas.
Yes, this question is for Mr. Kennedy. How did the stock market crash of 1929 affect you?
Well, Thomas, actually, I did pretty well after the stock market crash. You see, in the latter part of the 1920s, I was convinced that the market was overheated, and so I sold most of my stocks and put my money into cash. Well, then when the market bottomed out, there were a lot of deals available, and I turned out to be pretty good at picking which ones were going to bounce back. So I made quite a bit of money. In fact, in 1932, when the stock market still lost 20%, I doubled my money. But Thomas, I wasn't so concerned about my finances at that time. I was concerned about one of my children, and that is Jack. Jack was in prep school at Choate Prep School, and it turned out that he was undisciplined, really undisciplined about his grades, about money, about his health, and Thomas, even about his clothes. I visited him at Choate one time, and I said, Jack, if you would hang up your clothes after you wear them instead of putting them on the chair or on the bed or on the floor, just think of all the money you would save in pressing bills at the tailor shop. Well, money was never an issue with our children, but still we tried to teach them to be responsible and not waste their money. So that's my stock market experience, Thomas. And who is the next question for?
This one is for Mrs. Kennedy. Can you tell us about your children's education?
Oh, let's see, our children's education. Let's start with Joe Jr. He enrolled for a year in the London School of Economics. Now, during the summer, he traveled and visited Germany and Russia and returned home with a quite rosy view of communism. Of course, he tried to enlighten his father on this view until one day, or during dinner, Joe exploded. He said to Joe Jr., once you sell your car and you sell your horse and you sell your boat, then you may talk to me about communism, but I don't want to hear another word about it in this house until then. Well, that did put a stop to those discussions. And then there was Jack. While he was still in elementary school, he once remarked, if you study too much, you're likely to go crazy. Well, he still was not applying himself at Choate Prep School, like Joe mentioned. The school's headmaster would refer to boys who did not quite live up to their school standard of behavior, call them muckers. So what did Jack do and his best friend Lim? They formed a muckers club, and they invited all the classmates to join. Well, obviously the school was very unhappy when they learned about it, and Joe needed to go to the school to try to straighten out and smooth things out with the school. And now Joe always worried about Jack not living up to his potential, not going as far up the ladder as he should. But the headmaster felt that Jack had a very clever and individualistic mind, and that we don't need to worry about him. I guess he was right, wasn't he, How many of you have worried about a child of yours only to discover they find success in their own way? Unfortunately, we don't have time to tell you about all 9 children's education, but let me tell you a little bit about how Joe and I helped with them, especially in current affairs. When Joe was out of town or unavailable, I would have the younger children, 6 and under, have dinner an hour early, and I would join them and discuss very simple topics. For the older children, I would post articles from the newspaper and magazines about current events and post them on the bulletin board. Now, they were expected to read those little notes and discuss those topics during their dinner time. Now, when the whole family was together, at home, at Hyannisport, on vacation, we would all eat together at the same time in one big table and discuss topics proposed by their father. They range from world affairs, economics, politics. Now, the older children were required and expected to participate and answer these questions, and the younger children, while they were expected to listen, but they could contribute if they had anything to add. Oh my, it was a fun evening with the whole family together in somewhat of a quiz show atmosphere. So yes, that was very fun. So that I can't remember. Is that number 7? What number was that?
That was 7.
And who has the next question?
Me.
Number 8.
I do actually. It's for Mr. Kennedy. How did you become part of the Roosevelt administration?
Well, Thomas, in 1934, FDR formed the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission. And that was to combat bad practices in the banking and securities industry. He felt that I would be a good chairman with my leadership ability and my banking and securities background. And so I accepted the chairmanship. Now, we hired nothing but outstanding attorneys. These names may sound familiar to you. Abe Fortas and William O. Douglas, they both became justices of the Supreme Court. So we put together some policies that would combat unethical practices in the securities industry. I went on a radio program for a 15-minute program nationwide in which I said that the SEC would wage war unmercifully on any brokers and bankers who did not follow our practices and our rules and were unethical. However, we would not in any way interfere with the respectable brokers and bankers who followed our rules. Well, the stock market had been very dead since the crash. No one had any confidence in it. So after my radio address, people gained confidence. They started investing in the market again, and the economy was on its way. A cover story article in Time magazine said that the SEC was the best managed of all of FDR's New Deal agencies. And I was very proud of that. So that was my involvement in the Roosevelt administration. And who's the next question for?
Okay, I do. This is from Mrs. Kennedy. Your sons, Joe Jr. and Jack, both enlisted in the service. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I will tell you about our boys' military service. Let's see, we'll start with Jack. He enlisted in the Navy and was commissioned as officer in naval intelligence. But he wanted sea duty, volunteered, and ended up on a PT boat. Now, as you may know, his boat was rammed by a Jap destroyer and he almost died. He received both the medals, Navy and Marine Corps medals, for saving several of his crew members' lives. but he sustained very serious back injuries that required eventually 2 back surgeries. But back problems plague him to this day. But he has a good humor about it all. Once, when he was asked how he became a war hero, he simply said, "It was easy. They cut my PT boat in half." Now, Joe Jr. enlisted in the Naval Air Corps and volunteered for a secret and very dangerous mission. He would pilot a B-24 Liberty bomber, which was made right here in Michigan at Willow Run, I believe. Now, the bomber was stripped down and loaded with explosives. He would fly his plane over the English countryside and bail out after he turned over the controls remotely to the pilots in the 2 B-17s accompanying him. They, in turn, would guide his plane by remote control over the English Channel and crash it into a predetermined target site. Well, after Joe Jr. affirmed that his plane was flying remotely, but before he and his co-pilot could exit the plane, it exploded. They were declared missing in action, but no bodies were ever found. This was devastating news to both of us, but especially to Joe. He had such high hopes for Joe Jr. Now, my stronger religious faith helped me cope with this tragedy better than Joe. But that's our son's military service. Thank you for the question, Matt. I believe that was number 9. And who has number 10? Thomas, perhaps?
Yes, this one's for Mr. Kennedy. How was your experience serving as U.S. Ambassador to England?
Well, Thomas, I really enjoyed being ambassador to England. Being Irish, of course, I really enjoy the British, and I really enjoyed playing golf there. Golf was invented in Britain, of course. So I really liked the people. And it gave me an opportunity to set up a really nice unofficial program in international relations for my 2 oldest boys, Joe Jr. and Jack. I would make appointments at embassies throughout Europe, and they would meet the ambassadors and meet world leaders. And Jack is still using those experiences in his role as president today. But the other side of the ambassadorship was not as pleasant. You see, England and Germany were at war. We hadn't entered the war yet. And I was convinced that if Hitler invaded England, it would be very quick and England would not survive because of the tremendous German Air Force. So my idea was that England should compromise with Hitler on his advances into Czechoslovakia and other countries and Poland and so forth in exchange for a pledge not to invade England. Well, Winston Churchill didn't agree with that. He didn't trust Hitler. He said it wouldn't matter what Hitler pledged, he would still invade England. But Churchill felt England could survive an invasion. Well, FDR, he agreed with Churchill, so I was odd man out. Well, it turned out that I had heard rumors that FDR wanted to bring me back from my post, so I kept saying to him, how am I doing, Franklin? Oh, you're doing fine, Joe, you're doing fine. Well, I learned later that he was afraid to bring me back early because he thought he might lose some of the Irish vote in the next election. And also, he viewed me as a possible competitor for the next presidential election. It turned out that I was wrong about Hitler. I thought he was like any good politician or manager, businessman, and he was looking out for the best interests of German people, trying to restore their economy after World War I. But it turned out that he was crazy, and he had this insane desire to rule Europe at all costs. So me being wrong about Hitler, Thomas, that's plagued me for all of my life. Ambassadorship, some very good experiences and some not so good experiences. Who has the next question, and who is it for?
This is for you again. How was your experience when, excuse me, what did you do after resigning as ambassador to England?
Well, Matt, after resigning as ambassador, I started doing more real estate, and I bought a lot of properties in New York. I also bought the big center in Chicago, the Merchandise Mart, the largest building in the world at the time. And our daughter Eunice's husband, Sergeant Schreiber, ran that for us. But really, I started to spend a lot of my time behind the scenes helping Jack's political career. After graduating from Harvard, he spent a little time as a newsman out in the West Coast. But you know, he came to me one day and he said, Dad, he said, I don't want to write about the news. I want to help make the news. And so he ran for the U.S. House of Representatives in his grandfather Honey Fitt's old district in Boston. Served there for a while, and then, of course, was elected to the U.S. Senate from Massachusetts. Well, I did help finance a lot of his campaign. Campaigns are expensive, it costs money. I had a lot of money. Well, a lot of people criticized us for that, but Jack handled it with his usual sense of humor. At a gridiron dinner one year in Washington, they did a skit about me spending so much money on Jack's elections. When Jack's rebuttal time came, he got up and he pulled a letter out of his pocket, a telegram supposedly from me, and read it. And it said, Dear Jack, do not spend a penny more than necessary to win. I refuse to pay for a landslide. So that's the way Jack handled those kind of things. Well, you know, Rose deserved a lot of credit in his elections too. When he was running for the U.S. House of Representatives, she had what she called coffee with the Kennedys. And she would organize these afternoon coffee meetings for ladies. Some of them, I remember one that got 2,000 people there. And they came to see her then war hero, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Then when he was running for the Senate, she got a little fancy and she sent out engraved invitations to women to come to a reception for Congressman John Fitzgerald Kennedy and Mrs. Kennedy. And so a lot of these people never received an engraved invitation. They were quite flattered and they attended. So she had a big part in this. It was determined later that a lot of Jack's success was aided by the female vote in all of his elections. And Rose deserves a lot of credit for that. Of course, I observed that the ladies kind of were attracted to Jack pretty much on his own, if you know what I mean. So who's the next question for?
Next question is for Mrs. Kennedy. How did you like being the mother of a candidate when Jack was running for his first office as U.S. Congressman from Boston?
Oh, well, at first I thought it was exciting. Being the mother of someone running for Congress. Well, that was until I was in a cab in Boston, and I asked the cabbie for whom did he think he might vote in this upcoming election. And he said, well, I think maybe that young Kennedy kid from East Boston, because he had been in the Navy and so had the cabbie. And I said, oh, that's good. He said, why? Are you some relative or something? I proudly said, yes, I am Rose Kennedy, his mother. Well, the cabbie slowed down a little and said, why am I ever glad to meet you? I, of course, smiled and said, thank you. Cabbie said, Jack rode in my cab 2 days ago, and he still owes me $1.38. Well, pay the cabbie for Jack, but I learned my lesson. Never again would I tell a cabbie who I was. So that's my experience, Thomas. I believe that was that number, I've forgotten already, 12? Yeah. Who has the next question?
I do. This is from Mr. Kennedy. What was the toughest part of Jack's presidential campaign?
Well, Matt, there were actually three main issues that were problems. The first, of course, was his religion. There was never a Catholic elected president of the United States, and most people thought there never would be, including the leaders of the Catholic Church. They would not openly support Jack because they were sure he was going to lose, and they did not want to be tainted with the defeat. You know, I never quite forgiven the leaders of the Catholic Church for that. The second issue was his health, but his vicious and vigorous campaigning showed that he had certainly the health to serve as president. The third issue was his youth. At age 43, he would be the youngest president ever, and his supposed lack of experience because of his age. But the tremendous performance he did in the debates, television debates against his opponent, Vice President Richard Nixon, demonstrated that certainly his age and his experience were no liabilities. In fact, in many cases, were assets. So it was quite an election. One of the interesting things is that somebody once criticized, questioned the size of a crowd in an outdoor rally. Can you imagine anyone making a big issue about the crowd size at an outdoor political event? Well, anyway, they said that the estimate of 35,000 just sounded too high. Well, Jack, with his usual humor, he said, well, you know, my press secretary, Pierre Salinger, he handles that. What he does is he counts the nuns and then multiplies by 100. So evidently there were 350 nuns there that day. So that's the way Jack handled it. Well, as you know, he did win the election, very close, less than 0.2% of the popular vote. In the Electoral College, it was much bigger, some 300 for him, some 200 for Mr. Nixon. So he was the first Catholic president and the youngest president at 43 ever elected. And we're so proud of Jack. His inaugural speech, in which he said, ask not what your country can do for you, but rather what you can do for your country, has inspired people ever since. His pledge to put a man on the moon in 10 years, his founding of the Peace Corps, and his laying the groundwork for the civil rights. We're all tremendously proud of him for that. And we're very proud of Bobby, too. Bobby managed his campaign and did a tremendous job. And as you know, he appointed Bobby as Attorney General. Now, neither Bobby nor Jack thought that was a good idea because of the nepotism. But I said to Jack, with all that's going on in this country, you need an Attorney General that you can trust completely, and that would be Bobby. So reluctantly, he decided to do that. Well, before he was inaugurated, he told a couple of friends that he was going to do that. And one of his friends said, well, when are you going to announce that it's going to be Bobby? And Jack said, well, I'm going to step out of my townhouse in Washington at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to look up and down the street both ways to make sure no one's there. And then I'm going to whisper, it's Bobby. So you can see how reluctant he still was. But it's worked out fine, and Bobby has become a wonderful Attorney General. Now, there was another criticism that was raised after he appointed Bobby. Someone said, well, you know, Bobby has a law degree, but he's never practiced law. Is that right for an Attorney General? Jack, again with his humor, said, well, you know, a lawyer does need experience before he practices law. And so this Attorney General is a good spot for Bobby to get some experience before he practices law. So that's how he handled it, always with humor. Well, Bobby has a lot of talent, and when Jack completes his second term, which we're very confident of, who knows? Maybe Bobby will be ready for a run at the presidency then. And then there's our youngest son, Teddy, and he's 28, but he's considering a run for the Senate in Massachusetts next year. So Rose and I have always urged our children to have careers that contribute to public service, and they're certainly doing it big time, aren't they? So who has the next question, and who is it for?
It's for Mrs. Kennedy. Can you tell us about your reaction to being the mother of the President of the United States?
Well, of course, I'm very proud to be the mother of a president of the United States. Now, you do know that during his campaign, I gave speeches in 4 of the 7 primaries, and he won each one of those. And then after his nomination, I gave 46 speeches in 14 states at the age of 70. Oh, people seem to enjoy hearing about me tell all sorts of stories about our family. I would like to add just a little personal note. At the presidential inaugural ball, I wore the same dress that I did in 1938 when I was presented to the King and Queen of England at Buckingham Palace. That was when Joe was ambassador there. Well, even the press remarked that my figure had not shifted 1 inch in all those years. Now, don't you think it's remarkable at my age and after 9 children, I can still fit into a size 8. Oh, people also remark that when I wear my pillbox hats, they think of a Jackie. Well, these hats were very popular in Paris when I visited one time. I bought several and gave one to Jackie, and she started wearing them and started this big national fashion trend of hers. Well, I do believe that we have run out of time for questions, but before we say goodbye and thank you for watching and listening to us, Joe, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Yes, thank you again very much for attending our session at your library. We hope that you've learned some things about us and about our family, and we're very pleased that you invited us. And now I'm going to step out of character and do a costume change here. As you know, I'm not Joe Kennedy. You all know that, but I hope for a little while you felt I was. That's what we like to do at Doré Productions, is to bring these historical people to you and let you experience them and hopefully learn about them. My real name is Russ Doré. I live in Northville, and I've been doing historical presentations and other presentations for over 20 years. Now at this time, we'd like to tell you a little about what happened to Joe and Rose after 1961. So Joseph Kennedy suffered a massive stroke in December 1961 at the age of 73. Left him paralyzed on his left side, and he suffered the loss of his speech ability. He was confined to a wheelchair. He lived to see his son, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, assassinated in 1963, and his son, Robert Kennedy, assassinated in 1968. Joseph Kennedy died in November of 1969 at age 81. Joe Kennedy, outliving all of his sons except Senator Ted Kennedy, who survived him by 40 years. Joe Kennedy was a highly controversial individual, spoke honestly to the point of bluntness. He was known as a womanizer, a very self-centered individual, and was anti-Semitic. Because of his appeasement position in Germany during the war, he had to stay in the background during JFK's presidential campaign. But he was close to his 9 children and inspired each to reach the highest level of contribution to society that each of them was capable of. So let's think of this. His oldest son, Joe, was a war hero. Second oldest son, John, a president. Next oldest son, Bobby, a U.S. Attorney General, a U.S. Senator, and a candidate for president. And Ted, his youngest son, a long-serving U.S. Senator. What about their daughters? His daughter, Eunice, founded the Special Olympics and was married to Sergeant Shriver, who headed the Peace Corps. His daughter, Patricia, was a journalist and was married to actor Peter Lawford. His daughter, Jean, was a U.S. ambassador to Ireland and was married to Stephen Smith. How about the grandchildren? Joe's granddaughter, who was Jack's daughter, Caroline, served as U.S. ambassador to Japan. A grandson, Patrick Joseph Kennedy, who was Ted Kennedy's son, served as U.S. congressman from Rhode Island. Another grandson, Mark Shriver, son of Eunice, served in the Maryland House of Delegates. Eunice's daughter, Maria Shriver, was a TV journalist and was married to Arnold Schwarzenegger, former governor of California. And how about the next generation, the grandchildren? Well, Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, granddaughter of Bobby, served as lieutenant governor of Maryland. Joe's great-grandson and namesake, Joseph P. Kennedy III, who was Bobby's grandson, was a U.S. congressman from Massachusetts. And he recently, unfortunately, lost his re-election bid. There's not been another single family in the history of the United States that has had such a broad record of public service to our country. After Joseph Kennedy's death, Jackie Kennedy stated, "He's the reason we exist at all. Without him, without his vision, his dream, his desires for his children, none of us would be who we are. We'd all have done something with our lives, obviously, but not this." I have a personal experience with the Kennedys I'd like to share with you. I was skiing at Sun Valley, and this was right after JFK was killed, and Jackie was there with her children, and Bobby and Ethel with their children. I stood in line, a couple people behind Jackie, for a hamburger one noon, but I had a conversation with Bobby. I had gone over to the lodge to make a reservation for dinner, and I walked in, there was a sign there, and it said, "Coats and ties and long dresses required for dinner." And I said, "Well, my wife and I just have ski clothes. We don't do this. Where can we have dinner?" And they said at the Rams Horn Pub. And so I walked over there, made a reservation. On the way back, and you kind of remember these things, I was walking along, my head was down a little because it was snowing, keep the snow off my glasses. Someone was coming toward me, one pant leg tucked in and one out. I just remembered that. As we got right up to each other, I looked up and it was Bobby Kennedy. And I said hi, and he said hi. So I've had a conversation with Bobby Kennedy. Well, isn't that what a conversation is? Two people talking to each other. Well, it turned out we went to dinner at the Ram's Head Pub, and the Kennedys were also having dinner there. Evidently, they didn't bring their fancy clothes either. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Nancy and have her tell about Rose's life after 1961. Nancy?
Thanks, Russ. My name in real life is Nancy Schuster, and a lot of people ask if Russ and I are married, and the answer is yes. Yes, we are, but not to each other. But we have been acting partners since 1990, almost 30 years now, when we met playing Mr. and Mrs. Kirby at a community theater production of You Can't Take It With You. And as they say, the rest is history. Russ started his Doré Productions, and a group of us began doing murder mysteries at Janetti's in Northville, and we also were regular performers on the Walled Lake Dinner Train. I joined him in these historical presentations about 6 years ago when he finally wrote a script with a woman in it. So enough about us. I'll tell you a little bit about Rose. I need glasses for this. Okay. Rose suffered a stroke in 1984, 15 years after her husband passed away. She was confined to a wheelchair for another 10 years until her death in 1995 at age 104. She outlived 4 of her 9 children. She had 26 grandchildren, 42 great-grandchildren. Her son, Ted, said at her funeral, "For all of us, Dad was the spark. Mother was the light of our lives. He was our greatest fan. She was our greatest teacher." Rose wrote in her autobiography, "I looked on child rearing not only as a work of love and duty, but as a profession that was fully as interesting and challenging as any honorable profession in the world, and one that demanded the best that I could bring to it. What greater inspiration and challenges are there for a mother other than the hope of raising a great son and daughter?" And Rose certainly managed to do that. So thank you again for listening and joining us. And now I'll turn it over to Matt. Thank you again. Bye. Matt, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Russ and Nancy, for your typically good, excellent presentation. We've had you here before, and we'll have you here again in some point in the future. In the meantime, I want to thank our audience, and I want to urge everybody to look at the website and see what our program offerings are for the fall. We have pretty much something for everybody. So please take a look at that. And thank you to Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy, and thank you for everybody who attended this presentation. And I hope to see you again at one of these presentations soon. Thank you all, and good night.